Hi, I'm Loretta and this is my sister
Sharon.
We are founders of the plant-based retreat, The Detox Barn, and we're also a comedy double act. I know, funny vegans. Shoot me now.
9 years ago, I was diagnosed with a chronic autoimmune disease and got myself better using a plant-based diet. Since then, I've just fallen in love with living well.
I retrained as a natural vegan chef, and each week we'll be interviewing experts in the wellness industry, as well as sharing the highs and lows of trying to live well as single mums living together with our 2 kids. So another week, how well have we lived this week? Well, I actually wanted to get something off my chest. It's been a really subtle thing.
What? Oh, God. What?
And it's really irritating me, and I find it deeply patronising. So basically, you do this thing, and I don't know if you know that you're doing it, but I'm finding it really, really annoying. And it's not obvious enough to say something in the moment, but it's really irritating me. Basically, ever since you've had a boyfriend, and I'm single, wherever we go, wherever I might be, whenever I bump into a stranger that happens to be male, you do this weird thing of going, he's all right, he might be nice. You do this weird, you don't actually say anything, but I'm giving words so the listeners can understand what it's like. Someone, like the other day, I went for a coffee, asked for a flat white, he started chatting to me. Sharon's like, he seems nice.
Well, I'm just trying to say, you never know.
No, but it's going too far. It's too much. Someone held the door open for me. You're like,
Oh,
Yeah, I had a drainage problem. And plumber comes round. He was cross-eyed, a moustache. I mean, you couldn't make him up.
That could get corrected, that eye. I think you just had a lazy eye.
Well, whatever. He was a dimwit. And you're going, the plumber? Parents' evening. I'm about to go online for parents' evening. You're going, you put some makeup on? I feel like I'm constantly auditioning. I feel like, I'm basically got a price tag around my neck. Like, I've got to be constantly looking my best. I'm out walking the dog, you put some makeup on. I mean, I'm picking up dog poo and you're like, oh, look at him. He's nice. Ooh. I'm like, just stop it.
Well, I'm not. All I'm saying is that, it might be nice for you to meet someone like I
Well,
met
if I
someone.
really want, yeah, exactly. That, even the way you say that, mate, is really patronising and really condescending. It's just too much. It's just too. I mean, the other when I found a lump in my breast, I'm going to the doctors. I'm like, that's just weird.
You actually have said before you quite like it when the doctors.
No, I didn't.
You have actually said that. You have said, like, when the doctors, they're really soft and tender when they're checking for lumps in your breast.
No, I said it once about the dentist.
No, you don't lie.
No,
You're embarrassed in front of the podcast.
No.
You said the way they're so gently going, looking at the lump and feeling your breast.
No, I never said that.
You've quite enjoyed it. You've quite enjoyed a breast examination. Admit it.
No, I do not enjoy it. I mean, I'm not that desperate. I mean, it's bad not having a boyfriend, but I'm so desperate that I go and pretend to have lumps so I can go to the doctor so we can feel my breast.
No,
please, Sharon.
No.
But enough. I don't want to just get off this subject.
You didn't do that. But
No.
you have said to me before.
No.
You're embarrassed now.
No, I'm not
embarrassed. She has said to me before that she went for an examination.
No, I
You had a
didn't.
genuine lump, but you generally enjoyed the examination.
No, I didn't. I'm getting off this subject.
So
Get
wrong.
it.
Right, okay. All I'm saying is just, I know you're happy, but you could be happier. Like me, I'm happier.
But are you happier? Are you
Yes,
happier?
I am.
You're constantly on antibiotics with cystitis. You're crying, going to the doctors. Is that happy? I don't think so.
Well, there is that's true.
I think it's a lack of estrogen, if I'm being honest. You want to check those levels.
Yeah,
And the
there is.
sprouting hairs. I can see one now.
There is an estrogen problem.
That's
Yeah,
not
I
going to
have-
keep your relationship.
I have got like a boyfriend, but I've also got constant cystitis. So it's a balancing act, really.
The bearded woman.
What are you talking about? I've got no hairs on my chin.
Okay, I'm joking.
I didn't realise I was doing it. And
Okay.
so I won't do it anymore.
Thank
right?
you. I'd
You're
really
happy being
appreciate it.
single?
Yes, I am
Won't do it
very,
anymore.
very happy. Thank
Okay,
you.
all right. Although, you never know who's listening to this. Hey, you have got a lovely voice. So if you're listening...
Yeah. I secretly do want a boyfriend.
Oh, not that voice.
No. a bit weird.
That's an awful voice.
I wonder if I can't find a
do want a
boyfriend. But if I
boyfriend.
get a boyfriend, I go a bit like this. No.
No, seriously though, you have got lovely... Let's hear your lovely voice. Let the listeners hear it.
I do really want a boyfriend.
See, listen to that voice.
Yeah, but it's like dating in the dark. But it's not the dark. It's in front of a mic and no one knows they're dating. Trying to find a date. What is that?
Well, I've actually got a really good idea. Our listeners, someone could write in, just on the sound of her voice, right? You could write in and ask for a date. And then you could go on the date and then we can talk about it on the podcast.
No, that is not going to happen. I'm not take that. Do you know what I mean? I'm not blimmin' Robbie Williams. I'm going to go out and it's a prize for the listeners.
Well,
your prize is Loretta Gavin. Well, great.
Well,
Some perimenopausal single mum.
I will not have anything said about the menopause. I don't think anyone is going to write in. But if you do, if anyone does fancy the sound of Loretta's voice.
Yeah, but do email in, please. Please.
What's the email address?
It's
hello@gavinsisters.co.uk, and then we'll talk about it on the podcast.
But don't email me if you're the dimwit plumber.
So this week we have Grace Lordan, who is a behavioural scientist. She's written an incredible book called Think Big, which is a practical guide on how to help you achieve those big dreams.
Dr. Grace Lordan is the founding director of the Inclusion Initiative and an associate professor at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Grace is an economist, and her research is focused on quantifying the benefits of inclusion within and across firms, as well as designing interventions that level the playing field for underrepresented talent within firms. Grace is an expert advisor to the UK government and is on the Women in Finance Charters Advisory Board. Her academic writings have been published in top international journals, and she has written for the Financial Times and Harvard Business Review. Grace is a regular speaker and advisor to blue-chip finance and technology firms. Think Big is her first book and talks about all the small steps you can take to build the future you want. Welcome to the podcast, Grace. We absolutely loved your book, and essentially it's a guide to achieving your dreams. So will you move in with me and help me on a daily basis?
Yeah, for the right price. For the right price.
Just to start with, tell us about why you wrote the book and how you found writing it.
So, for the longest time before writing Think Big, I worked with corporate companies and really talking to groups of people about why there were differences in pay and in promotion rates, particularly for men versus women, but often across other demographics within those organizations. And I would give this talk, and I would kind of talk about the behavioral science behind the reasons why we have these different outcomes, what firms shouldn't do, and ultimately what firms should do. And very often it was actually pitched at executives. So I found myself often in the room with these people who were at the beginning of their career or maybe in the middle of their career, having plateaued, giving advice on what they could do if they had lots of power. And people used to say that, this is interesting, we find behavioral science interesting, but there really isn't anything there for an individual with respect to kind of creating the career that they wanted. And that's really how it was born, from people kind of saying to me over and over again, your talks are good, but not good enough. So I've tried to address that in writing Think Big.
You're a professor. That's obviously a very male-dominated world. As a woman, how have you found working in that world? And do you experience gender bias, as you talk about in the book?
It's a great question. So my first degree was computer science, and I really was one of the only few. There was less than 10 of us in a class of 150. Wow. And we shrunk even more in second year when so many people failed. So I was really in this high share of men environment. And I have to say, I didn't really know it as a young person. I am probably somebody who is very thick-skinned, and kind of on reflection, things that might have negatively affected other people probably rolled off me a bit. And I've managed to go through my career pretty well. Economics is tough. It really is, again, kind of male-dominated. And I think it's only more recently that I'm kind of hitting the kind of final rungs of my career when I am noticing, so you're getting like to the top of the pyramid, that I am kind of noticing pushback from men that I've never experienced before when I was kind of non-threatening, I guess, kind of going along. And that really interests me. And it kind of mirrors the experiences of women in financial and professional services and also in technology, that actually things can start off quite well, but somewhere around the middle for some people, depending on their companies, and sometimes a bit later, where you do notice, things like gender bias, where the men want you to do teaching, but not actually make decisions, for example, or the men might want you to do more administration tasks and not necessarily kind of invite you to be in on the strategy meetings. And ultimately, I think that's the thing for me to crack in my work going forward, both for myself as an individual. So maybe I'll have a sequel to Think Big that will talk about that journey, but also for other people, because I see it over and over again in industries where we do definitely want to have more shares of women at the top.
How do you deal with that gender bias of sort of, not being invited to the strategy meeting? You can make the tea. I know it's not as bad as that, but
you'd be surprised.
Do you call them out on it? Or, especially being behavioural scientists, the irony, like, how do you deal with it?
I do call it out, I have to say, and particularly for what I call high stakes decisions. So Like when I'm teaching inclusive leadership and also in my own life, when I'm in a situation, I try to assume positive intent, right? So you try to assume that the person on the other side, just maybe they're miseducated, misguided. They are, exposed to the same social norms as I am, just probably in the other direction. But I think where big decisions are being made, like who to hire, who to promote, who to give a pay rise to, who to give a big opportunity to, then I have to call it out, because then it's affecting somebody's life in the moment. So, I am someone who rolls the punches and I don't sweat the small stuff. But ultimately, I think particularly if I'm making a decision for someone else, but also kind of in my own life, I am ambitious. It is something in those moments that I will just say, look, this really isn't on, what's happening isn't right, and you're not actually following the policies that you're claiming that you are.
Oh, brilliant. Well done, you. And also, like your natural thick skin, like Loretta and I, we came from a large Irish family and we've got incredibly thick skin. But part of it is I've had to have thick skin because I've had so much rejection in my industry that there's just no way you would survive without having that kind of extra layer. Is that natural for you, or have you sort of developed that over time?
I've never thought about rejection until when Think Big was published and people kept asking me about fear of failure and rejection. And most people who kind of go far in life will say, actually, if you're not rejected, you're never going to get anywhere. So kind of every time I kind of put myself out there to try and do something, should it not work out right, I try to take learning from that situation. I heard one of my colleagues, Erica Brodnock, who's this amazing woman actually on a podcast recently, and she talked about this idea of collecting no's. So she's a Black professional woman and trying to raise venture where there's lots of biases that she's being impacted by. And she kind of talks about the idea, I've settled on the fact that I have to collect no's, so each no is kind of closer in my journey. Now, I didn't come up with that expression, but I really like it. And I think that was something that I had, which without realizing it as a value from when I was a kid, that actually ultimately you try something and you might not necessarily do good at it. I mean, if I was to trace it back to a theory, I was incredibly bad at sports as a kid and I did play sports. So I was constantly being rejected and failing as a child. So maybe there's something in that, in the upbringing. But I think it's so important that we reframe what it means to succeed and what it means to fail, and actually recognize that if you're not failing, you're not putting yourself out there.
I mean, I absolutely love that, and we use that a lot. Sometimes I feel like maybe I'm a bit delusional because I'm just reframing things so that they suit me. You know what I mean? Like, you're not a failure. Look, you're just really go-getter.
Yes, you didn't dump me.
Well, I don't know how you reframe that. Well, you do. You naturally do, don't you? You sort of go, actually, that person wasn't right for me. And we all find social narratives that hopefully support our lives in a better light, because otherwise it's all a bit shit, isn't it? I love that about the reframing, and I do it a lot. And I think especially when you go through something bad, I'm always going, oh God, why did I go through that? I'm always trying to look for the silver lining. It builds a lot of strength, I think, from just kind of looking at situations and reframing it in a certain way.
Yeah, it's much weaker to go, why me?
Yeah.
Bastards.
Why does this keep happening? Yeah, it doesn't help.
If you study behavioral science, one of the things that it will tell you is to try to disentangle luck from your own effort, right? So if he dumped you because you cheated, then maybe there's some reflection to be done. But maybe he's just a jerk, so you just got unlucky and you picked the wrong guy. The same with milestones. Figuring out, was it luck or was it me, is really helpful, because if it's you can just improve for the next time. There's always time. There's always time, so you can just kind of set a goal to improve for the next time. And I kind of like that analogy, because it means that you're not reframing everything in a sense that kind of makes you out to be a wonderful person when you're really doing incredibly badly at life. But it allows you to learn from the moments when things aren't going your way.
I thought that was really interesting in the book, that fear of failure paralyzes people. I don't suffer with that. I'm more of a go-getter, and I'll do things, and if it fails, it fails. But I know lots and lots of people would rather not do it than fail. What would be your top tips for people like that go, I'd love to, but I'm too scared?
So I think the first thing is to realize that the anticipation is actually worse than the experience. So it really fascinates me that when people anticipate what's actually going to happen, if it's negative, including myself, the reactions that we get in our body are worse than going through it. So as human beings, we're really bad at estimating that we'll actually adapt, that we'll bounce back, and that we'll get distracted by something else. So I think just hearing that message is helpful. People like Paul Jordan, who I know was on the first kind of podcast, who writes a lot about narratives and kind of changing your own story. might say something like, you should kind of battle that narrative in some way and kind of go to war with yourself. And I think fundamentally, if I'm someone who has imposter syndrome, it's going to be really difficult for me to go in battle with my own psychology when I'm having a really down moment. So what I really like is the literature around the idea of, if someone else believes in you, it's actually likely to get you to do something and lessen your fear of failure. So I really advocate for the idea of hype buddies. So somebody who, when you're feeling, actually, I can't put myself out there, I'm terrorized, says to you, firstly, you've got this, you're going to do well. And then when you fall flat on your face, brings you for a drink and some chocolates. So they've caught you on both sides. And I think once you start going through, so for people who are listening who really avoid failure, actually going through failure makes you more resilient, because you do realize that you have many more choices than life might actually otherwise show when you're kind of stuck in that anxiety mode. So it's kind of cruel to say, just get on with it. And I think the best thing that we have is, if you can't just get on with it, find someone who can give you the confidence boost that can make you get on with it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting in your book as well, because you talked about male and female, is that boys get kind of exposed to rejection from a much earlier age, in the fact that and I think it's still the same, that they're sort of traditionally supposed to ask the girl out. And because they do that and they experience it and they go, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought, and they go on to the next, that builds resilience in them. But as females, we're not exposed to that as much early on. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is an experiment that you obviously can't do, because we don't, randomly select boys and girls to be the ones to ask for dates. But I really fundamentally believe that boys experience much more rejection, A, because of dating, as you rightly pointed out, and B, because they're much more likely to be in sports. So they lose much more often as kids as compared to girls. And I think those things together make them much less likely to sweat the small stuff when they're adults. And, for anyone who's listening to this who kind of gets grumpy, I know that there's a distribution between men and women. But when it comes to things like competitiveness, imposter syndrome, fear of failure, women do tend to be on the negative side of those things. And the explanation does seem to lie in childhood.
In the way that the different genders are brought up.
Yes. So there's a really great paper by Alison Booth that looks at competitiveness, which is kind of related to putting yourself out there among children. And she sees in mixed schools that the girls lack what she calls competitive drive. But when she moves to single sex schools, there's absolutely no difference, really suggesting that the environment that we expose our children to in early life has this kind of legacy effect on them later on. So we kind of, by having boys and girls in school together, ironically, which you mightn't expect, it much more defines the sexes as compared to being in a single gender school.
Oh, that's fascinating. So are you saying, if, let's say I sent my daughter to an all-girls school, that she's more likely to be more competitive?
Yes, that's what the literature points to, and it's really credible. And I went to an all-girls school as well, so I like that conclusion. But again, it's kind of thinking about what do we expose our children to in formative years, and what's the type of legacy it leaves on us later on. And I think for anyone listening who did go to a mixed school and who feels imposter syndrome, you can rewire that. It just takes some work.
Okay, interesting. You also talk about growth mindset. Now, I've heard about growth mindset through actually my daughter's school. They talk about it. Sometimes I try and use it and she rolls her eyes at me. So she'll come in, she'll go, I can't do it, Mum, I can't do it. And I go, you can't do it yet? And she's just like, oh, fuck off. No, she doesn't say that. But you know what I mean? Tell us how, as adults, we can use this model, this growth mindset.
So this is an idea that's owed to Carl Dweck, and the premise behind it is that people are either in one or two categories. So either they have an idea that they can always grow, so everything is accepted as a challenge, or they have an idea that their abilities are fixed. And the people who have the growth mindset are much more likely to do better in life. Now, I don't think it's as cut and dry as how it's presented in the literature, in the sense that I think it's very possible to have a growth mindset in health and have a fixed mindset in your career. So kind of being reflective of where you actually would take on any challenge and where you would step back is kind of the first step in this. But ultimately, what you need to kind of get yourself to is realizing no matter what you want to do, whether you want to learn Japanese, whether you want to learn physics, whether you want to do public speaking, whether you want to become a prime minister, please do. Today, our prime minister isn't doing so well, so we need somebody to step up for that particular role very, very quickly, I can tell you. Put some small steps in place and move towards that, and you'll very soon see that you can absolutely achieve it. But the belief that you can change is fundamental in being able to acquire those skills or being able to take on that job. And again, the power of our own self-belief in what we can and can't do ultimately is one of the biggest determinants, regardless of skills, talents, and ability, that allows us to acquire new skills and allows us to do new things.
That's amazing, isn't it? So what you believe is more important than
your ability.
Yes.
Well, they do say as well, just thinking of Boris Johnson, but those types, the way that they were brought up in the environment, in the Eton environment type of schooling, I can't remember what book I read it in, but anyways, but they were saying that what the private education really gave them, it wasn't the education, it was the belief in themselves that they are the top of society.
a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, and that they can achieve anything. So that the greatest gift that they gave them wasn't what they learned in the science lessons. It was the belief about who they were as people. And I thought that was really fascinating.
I can see that as true. So I guess if you go to a place that you know historically has produced society's leaders, then you're going to hold a belief that it's much more likely to be you. That rings true to me.
It sort of links to mindset. They say mindset is the new psychology for success. Why is mindset so important?
Again, kind of for people who are listening who haven't managed to, do their New Year's resolutions this year, thinking fundamentally about, can you really believe that you can make this change? And why are you doing something differently to what you actually want to do? I think those two questions are really good to ask ourselves from time to time.
As you say about sort of achieving goals, and when we run the detox bar, and we get a lot, mainly women, we do get men as well, but they feel like really stuck in their lives, that they've tried to change many times. They've tried the diet over and over and over again, and they keep failing. And then you have a narrative of, I can't do it, because the behaviour, the habits, and I know you talk a lot about this in your book, is supporting the narrative. For anyone out there, Think Big, it really is a guide to sort of breaking down goals and habits, really, to be able to achieve what you want to achieve. And Thinking Big, obviously, it sort of sums it up. Whenever I read titles like Think Big, I'm like, gotta get that book. So
I will tell you that there's another Think Big on the market, which I didn't know, and it's written by Donald Trump, so you might want to retract that.
Oh my God.
No, I don't want his Think Big. That's like the narcissist guide. But no, and I think you sort of give examples, like, for example, if you're someone that really struggles with junk food, so then you would sort of stop buying junk food. So that's the process. You stop buying junk food, and then on a Sunday night, you pre-cook healthy food for the week. So then the process is going to support the habit, and the habit supports the narrative about themselves. Is that right?
Exactly. And the process is the most important thing to identify. So what's that small action that I can do differently that, if repeated, will get me to where I want to be?
So tell us a little bit about, like, in your book, what sort of examples we're talking about and in sort of achieving sort of big goals and how people implemented them.
So Think Big is really, I guess, about kind of changing your careers. And one of the first things that I say to people is that we need to kind of move away from the idea of job titles, and that's what we're attracted to. And we need to move away from the idea of lifestyles, and then we want a certain income, and that's what we're attracted to. And really think about, what are the activities that I want to do every single day in my job? And, for some people, they'll come up with a list of activities, and then there mightn't be a job that suits them perfectly, but it's moving them towards spending time in activities, if it's 70%, 80%, 90% of the time, that actually gets them to earn a living. And then once those activities are identified, the next question that I get people to ask themselves are, what are the small steps that allows me to do those activities? So for some things, like if you want to public speak, for example, you can just get on with it now. There's lots of platforms for you to public speak and put yourself out there. And I really encourage people doing that. For other activities that people might want to do, defend a case in a courtroom, they might need to go and acquire a new skill or do a degree. And again, thinking about that in small steps as a way to make that big change. And I think one of the things that I really like about the Think Big journey, particularly because I'm not somebody who likes big upheaval to my life, is that it's really framed in the way that once you get those small steps clear, you can get on with it. They'll become habits if you repeat them over time. You're on the right way in your journey, but ultimately you don't have to give up all of the other things you love, like spending time with your friends. Even if you have a full-time job and you can't afford to quit, the Think Big journey allows it to work around you. So it's really about figuring out those activities and putting the steps in place to be able to do them.
Yeah, I wish my ex-husband had read your book.
That's another story.
Yeah, it's another story. But yeah, it's just kind of...
I don't want to ask why now.
No, it's just that sort of, holding down a job and pursuing a dream is probably the most sensible thing you can do. I won't say any more about that.
No. What about when people do take risks and they go, okay, I'm going to try, and they receive a no or they fail. What advice have you got when you do receive that no?
And then you're like, see, I knew that would happen. What's the point?
I think there's in 2 steps, actually. So I think the first is to recognize that you're going to have an emotional reaction, like you've just really improvised to me. So thank you very much. And that you can already know the type of things that help you through that emotional reaction. So what is it that you would do if you got bad news today? You shouldn't wait until you have the bad news. You should have that in your disposal, and then you go and do that activity. So I give a list of mine that kind of ranges from, reflexology, going for a walk. If I hadn't been writing a book for Penguin, which is a family-friendly brand, I probably would have told you about screaming in a room by myself if I, got a really bad no. But figuring out ultimately what makes you feel better. And then the second stage is figuring out what went wrong. And this comes down to disentangling luck versus effort. Sometimes people will just get unlucky. If you keep saying you're getting unlucky, you're probably not being honest with yourself. If you figure out that it's something to do with effort and something to do with you, changing the effort and figuring out how to do things differently the next time is really important. I do some work now, bizarrely, with coaching people. And one of the things with kind of thinking about effort, very often for them, when they identify what's actually gone wrong, they can outsource the thing to make them look better the next time. So if it's presentation skills, if it's doing kind of a video that makes them, look more impressive, public speaking, all of these things can be kind of outsourced so you can actually get help. So I think from today's economy, it's letting people in who are better at the thing than you are in order to lend you a helping hand. And as a second part, paying them a decent wage when you do that.
And actually, that's kind of a sort of good guide to life, isn't it? When you've had a shit day, what can you do to make yourself feel better other than going to the wine, because that's a false economy and will make you feel worse in the long run? Whatever it is, like Loretta and I, because we don't drink alcohol, but our go-to is like Thai massage. That will generally cheer us up.
Yeah. And we have this thing, I don't know if you think this is a good thing. Whenever I get some bad news or a rejection or a no, and we're comedy writer performers, so it happens quite a lot. Sometimes the stakes are quite high. So we had a sitcom in development, and it takes so long to get it in development, and there's so many bits
There's
along
so many
the way.
yeses you need even to get it to the commissioning round.
And so then when it gets to commissioning round, that yes or no is massive. It's absolutely, you're literally on tender hooks. I could be the next, I don't know, Sharon Horgan.
I love her. She's fantastic.
Yeah, we love her as well. We're obsessed by her. But yeah, we did get a no. And it's gutting, it's crushing, because you can't turn around to someone and say, oh, we nearly had a sitcom.
Nearly.
It's so rubbish, isn't it? But we give ourselves 24 hours and then we go, right, let's send it back out. And we then make
we just
ourselves...
sort of get back up on the horse, really.
Yeah, but we actually do something proactive. We do the opposite. We don't go, we go, right, send it to someone else. And I don't know, it feels like maybe
it
sort
feels
of like
quite
self-harming.
No.
Sort of emotional self-harming.
Yeah.
But no.
Let's get another no.
No.
I think it is quite empowering. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
We just sort of go... I mean, we haven't been doing it as much lately, I've got to say. I think maybe this horse is staying down.
This horse is now a donkey.
This horse has been shot in the head. But no, my go-to is usually, fuck 'em.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, we know it's a really good product, and I'm not sort of deluding myself, but I think it is quite empowering for people out there that we all get no's, and actually just to get, as you said, reflect a bit, but get back out there and try again.
And I think your model, actually, I really like when it comes to success. So I'm not a big fan of, quit your job and put all of your chips in one basket, because people have to eat, they have to live, they have to pay rent.
Yeah.
But what you're ultimately doing and putting that out there is swinging for a fence, which if you get over it is going to be this huge milestone that will really kind of change your lives. And then in the meantime, you have a kind of a really good business that is also kind of steady. So this is almost like a diversified portfolio for an investor, where you have this kind of stock that's going to rise someday. It will come. You just keep putting yourself out there. And in the meantime, you kind of also have, kind of this way to make a steady income. And I think kind of for listeners, that's a really good way, if they do want to be entrepreneurs, if they want to put themselves out there, if they do kind of want to do something extraordinary, is figure out what the solid base is and then continue to swing for the fence with 20% of your time.
Yeah, that's really good advice, actually.
You also said at one point in the book that, I think it was a colleague, another professor, who sat you down and told you to be less direct. I thought that was really, really interesting. How did you feel when he said that, and what did you do about it?
I mean, I think the world would be a much better place if everybody was a bit more direct, to be honest. I mean, the world that we live in, people don't say what they mean, makes it actually quite hard to navigate sometimes. Yeah. When he said it, I really, it felt, I mean, and like in the book, I describe other kind of moments in my career where people pick parts of my character that I actually think are probably the best parts of me and tell me this isn't kind of working, Grace, you need to work on this aspect. And the reaction then, when it's a part of you that actually you really value in yourself, is always going to be much worse. So I did actually find it quite depressing, literally depressing. And when these moments happen, I did find when I was younger, I would find myself kind of living down to those expectations in some ways and really trying to kind of change to fit in with someone else's norm about what I should be. And now that I've got older, if somebody says something like that to me and it doesn't ring true and I'm worried about it, I will ask other people who are independent to verify. So I have this idea of a rule of three. So if I do kind of feel, am I pinching people too much when I make statements, then I'm happy to take that feedback. But if it's just one person who's having a bad day and taking it out on me, then I try to roll with the punch. But it's I think for listeners, it's kind of interesting to think about who you actually let sabotage your own thoughts about yourself on a daily basis, and thinking about how you can actually turn them down as if they were a radio station in some ways, so that it doesn't actually affect your mojo, which it did for me absolutely when I was younger.
Yeah.
And do you think there was a bit of gender bias going on? Because I always know there's a girl that we worked with who I think she's amazing, but she knows what she wants and she's clever and she knows how to say it. And it's really interesting that I hear other people talking about her, men actually, and they say that she's arrogant or
nightmare to work with.
And I'm like, but she isn't. She's just very
direct
and says it in a way that she doesn't mince her words. If that was a man, they would be hailed powerful or brilliant.
I think it is harder for women. And, again, it's kind of something in the last 5 years when I've been studying it more and seeing the evidence, you kind of realize just how tricky it is. I interviewed Marianne Seahart, who wrote the book, The Authority Gap. I'm not sure if your listeners have heard of it, but basically it shows all this evidence. And then at the end, it talks about how women can navigate it. And it says women should really pay attention to being both competent and giving enough warmth when they're being competent so that they don't actually feel intimidating. And for me, I suffer from reactance bias. So as soon as she wrote that in the book, and I'm a happy person, and as you can see, I'm smiling, I'm having a joke with you, I felt really sour, the idea that I now had to pretend to be warm if I was being competent at the same time. So again, kind of thinking about the lessons that we're teaching people by putting that message out there really is we need to navigate around the norms of men in order to succeed, because if you don't, you ultimately won't succeed.
I don't like that message. We've got to change, sort of be a bit sweet while we're being direct.
I don't like it, but what I will tell you is she's right. And this is what I said to her. She is right. And it really troubles me. And it kind of, what it teaches, but then for every single woman who plays that game, we get further away from progress. So in some ways, it needs all the women to come together and say, actually, when I'm being competent, I mightn't smile and get on with it. Or it needs enough women to get to the top who change those dynamics. But what I worry is that the women who get to the top have played the game. So we end up with the same thing for women over and over and over again. So that part of it does depress me, actually.
Yeah. I often hear people say that a lot, and there's no science in this whatsoever, but a lot of women that do actually get to the top have to be 10 times more ruthless, and actually aren't that nice because they've had to play that game in order to compete against the men. Is there any kind of truth in that?
So I haven't seen that, but there is something on competence to basically show that the women who end up at the top are something like 4 times more competent than men. And the men are 4 times more confident. So it's kind of this meta-analysis that brings that out. This isn't a conclusion that women are smarter than men, but it is a conclusion that women have to try much harder in order to get to the same place. So by the time they get there, they just have so much experience, they're probably feeling pretty tired.
Right.
And then they're called like tired and grumpy. They're like, you have my career for the next 20 years. Yeah.
I always think of Theresa May every time I have this conversation, because I think of Theresa May and how much she was bullied for the smallest things. She had such a hard time, didn't she? Yeah. And had we had her as Prime Minister, things might be different actually at the moment. Maybe she doesn't smile a lot, but definitely extraordinarily competent.
She was. She got all the dancing flack. She got everything, didn't she?
Yeah.
Dancing. She should never have done. I'm telling you, her publicity people told her to do that to be more relatable, because that's what they want in women.
No Michelle Obama, is she?
No. But again, Michelle Obama is a very rare type of woman who, even though she is but warm and competent, it's natural. It's authentic. You know, it's something that is just her.
It oozes out of her, doesn't it?
It does.
Well, you always say to me that I'm overly direct.
So Sharon is overly direct, and I have to compensate for her and warm people up because I don't want them to think we've got two witches as sisters.
Yeah.
So if she works with people, I'm like overly effusive just to make up for her, her lack of warmth. You also talk about in the book showing up for others, and I thought this was a really lovely part of the book. Why is showing up for other people integral to our own success?
Well, I think on kind of, if you take the selfish side of it, I think if you go networking, one of the worst things you can do is meet someone new and expect them to give you something. It's just kind of like it's the biggest turnoff on networking. So if you commit to networking and want to be successful, you have to start being reciprocal in the idea that actually once you meet somebody and they're in your network, if you spot an opportunity for them, you let them know. And then at some stage in the future, having faith that it will come back. It won't come back with everybody, but ultimately it will. And I think if you look at highly successful people, they do tend to have not strong social networks, but weak social networks. So they tend to have people who they could call up on a Friday if they had a problem, who would jump in and help them, but they wouldn't see that person from one end of the year to the other. So they kind of have this kind of underlying network. And that's true in comedy, which you're in. It's true in the creatives. It's true in economics, whatever profession that you have. But then I think also it's just the right thing to do. And I know the listeners on this podcast are interested in happiness. And there is kind of, really good evidence now that actually if you give kindness that's unconditional, that's purely altruistic, you do end up being happier yourself. So fundamentally, there's part of us as human beings that are meant to be quite giving. And I think kind of the COVID pandemic really stretched a lot of people's mental health, to be quite honest with you. So kind of when you meet people now, you don't necessarily know what they've been through. They could have had worries about putting food on the table. They might have lost their job. They might have lost a loved one in the pandemic. And I talk in the book about the fundamental attribution error, how we shouldn't judge people based on first impressions, particularly if they're grumpy or they do something that feels to slight us. And that's really the ethos behind it. You just don't really know what's going on in that person's life, and they might just be having a lot of bad luck.
It's quite interesting because we meet new guests every month at the Detox Barn, and the people that we initially make judgments on turn out to be completely different when you've spent a whole weekend with them. Yeah, it's fascinating.
I think that's quite interesting in dating as well. Like sometimes, your first, they say trust your instinct, but sometimes it's actually you do need to get to know someone before you can really make a judgment.
I've never dated, so I won't start giving dating advice, but I do, for people who are out there, it must be incredibly fascinating if you, instead of getting worried about every date, you take a step back and think of it as a human experiment and how the person across the way from you is feeling and what they've gone through. It's such an interesting thing to observe, I have to say.
Have you never dated, Grace?
No, I did date once, but in Ireland, which I know your folks are from, we don't really have dating where you go out for dinner in the way that you go out. You meet in the pub. They say you pull, and me and my partner have been together since I've been 19. So since then, I haven't actually dated. So I've done the Irish version of dating, but the idea of waiting 3 days to call somebody, I think when I met him, I texted him maybe 15 minutes after he left. So none of the rules apply in Irish dating, which is with young people's Irish dating, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, you've been saved.
We had a few Swedish au pairs, and they were the same. They were like, it's so cute, this dating, this English sort of dating, where you sort of go for dinner and then you wait and then they text you and all of this, the kind of ritual of it. And I was like, well, what do they do in Sweden?
They were like, we just shag.
We just shag.
And see if it works.
And if it goes well, then we're together.
We're like,
oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Irish Catholic, I don't know. I don't know if I'll be happy with that. Sorry, can I just ask something? Just related to what you said about networking.
Yeah, go on.
Why do I hate networking so much? And how can I make myself like it?
Oh, I hate it as well.
Yes.
I'm guessing it's the chit chat. So that's what I find the hardest.
Small talk.
Oh,
Yeah. And sometimes you do meet people that are pretty boring. So those two things together, again, I think kind of figuring out who you want in your network and maybe trying to do one-on-one makes a lot of sense. For people who really have to put themselves out there and their career depends on it, I always recommend turning up first and then speaking to whoever comes in first, because you know that they'll actually be eager. But exactly the same as you, Loretta, I really hate kind of standing there talking to multiple people and the chit chat, the boring talk.
And I also don't like the thought of talking to someone just because I want to get something out of them. Something about that makes me feel like, you know, if you want, I don't know, whatever you want from them, I don't feel like I hate talking to people for that very reason.
I think that's why you should invest early and invest kind of broadly. So I've become fascinated with portfolio careers, which I guess you have now.
Oh,
yeah.
Grace, I love saying I've got a portfolio career because it sounds so much better than it is.
But you do. And I think with portfolio careers, meeting people who are extraordinarily different to you makes absolutely good sense. So I don't strategically set out to meet people who are different to me, but I always love when I meet somebody where I learn lots of new things for them. When as soon as I meet them, that I find really fascinating.
Yeah, me too.
Well, we do it naturally at the Detox Bun when we run retreats. We obviously get to know our guests naturally. And by the end of it, there's always really interesting people there. And we're not setting out to network with them, but opportunities have come where they've emailed afterwards and gone, actually, would you come and do a talk here? And, you know, that opened up a doors for corporate wellness for us. And so it has, but not that pressured environment.
Yeah,
like,
you're not...
talk and get a deal signed.
Yeah.
That is a nightmare.
Yeah.
That character should be in your show. I like her.
Yeah. So just going back about happiness. So fundamentally, we can all see, you know, people have different levels of happiness, and you can see that in life. But you were saying that only 50% of it is genetic, and the rest of it, is it in the way we design our lives to be able to become happy? I know that Paul Dolan talks about that. Is it in the habits that you talk about that can create happiness, that other 50%?
Yes, I think it's worth looking at how you spend your time and dividing your time into 3 different buckets. So I think the first bucket is things that you're investing in your future for. So they might be hard. Like if you're learning trigonometry and you're my age, it's going to be much harder than if you do it when you're 4. So you need to have some pain. The second are the ones that you feel happy in the moment. So they give you kind of this pleasure. And then the last are your time sinkers, where you're spending a lot of time doing them. And they could range from, you know, boring networking events if you're doing too many, boring meetings, being on Netflix, watching too much, crashing out. And ultimately, I think you need to have a balance of the first and the second in order to have kind of a content life. The kind of instant gratification, and you know more about this than I do given your business, but if you stay in this kind of moment of instant gratification where you're doing whatever you want that makes you happy and none of it is actually investing in your future, you're very soon going to find yourself very miserable, because it probably means that you're eating badly, partying too much, and not taking care of your future self in respect to your present self. And I think that's really it, is figuring out how you allocate your time. So I don't think one thing makes any person happy. And I always get squirmy when people say, I want to work in corporate companies and make people happy. But I think we know some of the things that are fundamental, like good food, sleep, exercise, they absolutely work. And I think beyond that, it's personal, and it's down to how your time is spent.
But just on that point, I know you've worked for a lot of corporate companies, and my experience of people that work in these that have these big jobs is, I mean, their time shortage is just like, I think I'm busy. And then I look at their diary, you know, they're still emailing at 9, the weekends, the Sundays is crashing in, emails are going out. Like, how do they balance that? How do they find time to be happy?
Well, I think the people who've gotten it right are outsourcing, they're delegating, and they're giving people autonomy to get their jobs done. So ultimately, there's a lot of reporting into them and pushing back out. But it is actually possible, even if you're like a CEO in a C-suite, to, you know, do a Monday to Friday. There might be longer hours than the rest of people, but you should be able to switch off on Saturday and Sunday. I think the people who are really time poor are really kind of stuck in a controlling mode and in busy work. So they're calling meetings for no reason to satisfy their ego. And on top of that, they tend to be controlling and constantly micromanaging and checking up on and checking up on people. So if if somebody's listening and they're trying to aim to be in the C-suite, aiming to be the first type of person is really, really important. And, if you look at some of the kind of CEOs today, I mean, Elon Musk is always on Twitter. He has time, and this is the man, the richest man in the world. Jeff Bezos has lots of time. He's going to the moon. So, you don't have to be somebody who's in the business every single day. I think the harder jobs are actually ones that are one rung down. And again, it comes down to exactly the same thing. Delegate, give autonomy to people, and ultimately let them get on with their jobs.
And outsource things like doing the washing.
Yeah.
Making your home life easier.
Absolutely. Get somebody to pick up your laundry, get your food delivered if you can afford it. For people who have that level of wealth, absolutely should be buying back time through getting rid of the easy things that they don't like doing.
Yeah,
I'd have no problem with that.
Yeah, that would be my aim, to be that busy that I can outsource all the boring shit.
Yeah. It's on my vision board, a cleaner twice a week.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. And a PA. I want a PA. Oh.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Anyway, that's been fantastic. I know we're out of time, Grace. There's some amazing tips for people if they want to change careers.
Your book, Think Big, is out there. It's absolutely amazing. It really is a guide how to create your dreams, really, or make a massive change. And if you're scared to do it, then it's kind of a step-by-step process on how to do it. So thank you for putting that out to the world.
Thank you. This has been awesome. I've loved it.
You've been listening to the Gavin Sisters Wellness Show. If you enjoyed the show, please follow us, share, spread the word. It will really help. And obviously, if you didn't like it, then keep stum. We're single mums.
If you want to get in touch, we'd love to hear from you. Please do drop us an email at thegavinsisters@gmail.com.